Greetings, comic friends. I often get asked for advice by people in the community, whether here on YouTube or Instagram or Facebook or what have you, just about general pressing questions. And I'm always very happy to interact and ask and answer those questions to the community. Even though I have a pressing business, I'm in full support of people going out and learning how to do this and doing their own work if they're so inclined. It's not for everybody. I understand. It takes a lot of time and a lot of practice in learning, and it can be scary. I can understand it can be very, very scary. But that's what people like me are here for. Those pressers out there that do things for other people, is so we can alleviate some of those concerns. But I am in full support of people going out and learning the craft themselves. I think it's great, and I love getting those questions. So what I think, what I thought I'd like to do today for this video is give some tips or advice for those who are just starting out or thinking about pressing and cleaning comics. Maybe some things that I would have liked to have been told to me when I first started. Some of these things may seem kind of obvious once I say them, but they're things that kind of need to be said. So, just without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into it. We got someone sleeping a little bit back there, so keep it down. So the first thing, anytime you're taking on a new endeavor, it's do research. And something like this, where there is potential risk, you have to make sure you do a lot of research before you do anything at all. Make sure you do the research, make sure you understand. There are plenty of sources out there for learning about cleaning and pressing. I will say that there is kind of an authority out there, maybe sort of a de facto authority in the community. Goes by the name of Captain Mike. He has a website. That's when I first started doing research and looking up how to do things. I found his website. Captain Mike is spelled Captain's with a K and Mike is with a Y. But is a page that has an extensive amount of information on how to do cleaning and pressing, various techniques with pictures and all kinds of stuff. I will also say that he has a book, Comic Pressing CPR. Very clever name, the CPR, for Clean Press Renew. This basically contains all of the content that he has on his site. However, I bought this book for a couple reasons. One, this guy has put a lot of work and care and effort to catalog all this information he's gained over the years and experience, and he's put it out there for everyone to read and to learn from. And I think that's deserving of something. So, number one, I bought the book to support his work. Also, I prefer to have books. It's the same for me for comics, right? I prefer an actual book rather than digital. It's a little bit easier for a reference just to grab something and flip through it and find it. I think the book might be a little more verbose, but the book is really great. It describes a lot of things. There's a lot of pictures. There's a lot of pictures, and let's see, I can find. There's a lot of like visuals. Like when he's trying to explain something, there's visuals of how if you're a visual learner, of what he's explaining, charts and things like that. So I think the very first thing that you should do if you're thinking about doing this or starting this is do your research, check out those resources. There's others out there. There's Facebook groups and things like that. But before you get started, make sure you know what you're getting into. If you get the book or go over the website and all that, and you're like, whoa, this is way too much. There's a lot here. There's a lot of details. There's a lot of risk and all this. Don't feel bad about it. Just be glad that you made that decision. You know, be realistic of the amount of time and like take into account the kind of person that you are. If you're not the kind that is willing to spend a lot of time on learning something new, if you're going into thinking it like, oh, how hard it could be, clean and press, I can do that, whatever. If you're not the kind of person that, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if you're not the kind of person that can make that dedication, then find that out ahead of time by doing some research. So number 2, if you decided to go ahead and you want to start doing this, the biggest and most important thing is practice. You have to practice. You don't want the first book that you do to be some big high dollar book, and you read some stuff, you watch some videos on YouTube, even if there's some really great videos like mine that are up there. Don't dive into like a high dollar book when you try stuff. You have to practice this stuff. And if you're at this step, that means you're ready, you've done your research, you're ready to make an investment, because there's a monetary investment of getting the press and the materials and all this other stuff. If you've gone that far, make sure that you also spend the time and money to practice, because practice is going to cost money. Hopefully not a lot of money, because you're not practicing on valuable books. But go out and get books of all different types, right? Not all books are the same. The way that you press a Silver Age book is different. The way you clean and press a Silver Age book is not the same that you clean and press a Modern Age book. And there are different things to look out for these different types of eras and formats and all of that, whether it be normal staple bound or like a thick prestige format, different stocks of covers, different types of paper. They're all treated differently. So when you practice, don't just get one book and practice it and say or think, now I'm ready to do anything, because they're all a little bit different. So go to your local comic shop, go through the cheap bins and pull out all kinds of stuff from different eras. Even if, and this is a case where the more beat up, the better. Because if you find a single book that has a number of different defects with it, that's a bunch of different types of practice you can get. One of the best books I found, and this one, it was older. It was a Silver Age book. So I mean, for that older stuff, you might not be able to find stuff in your dollar bin, but you need to find examples of it. It was a Silver Age book. I didn't pay a lot for it. I think it was like $5 or something like that. But it had all kinds of things that needed to be cleaned on it. It had a rolled spine. It had all kinds of things that could be pressed out. Just all kinds of stuff wrong with it. And I got a lot of mileage out of that one book. So when you're looking for practice books, don't just go, here is a book of this type. Try to find a book of that type that has a number of defects with it. So you don't have to find, okay, here's my Silver Age spine roll example. Here's my Silver Age corner crunch example. If you find a bunch of that stuff all wrapped up in one book, that's great. So look for those sorts of things if possible. But definitely look for, different eras, different styles, different things, different defects that can be worked on. It's don't be surprised if you end up with a stack of practice books that have different things wrong with them, and different things, different eras and formats. And if you have to go to different comic shops, if you have to find examples online, if you have to pay some money for some of these examples, it's better to practice on a $10 Silver Age book than a $500 Silver Age book, right? It's worth that investment, just to practice. Even if it's just going to be throwaway stuff, go into those things thinking that you might mess it up, because that's what it's there for. It's for practice. But spend that time, spend that money. It is going to be worth it in the long run. You don't want to make those mistakes on either valuable books, or not necessarily valuable, but just your books that you don't want to have messed up because they're part of your actual collection. And that kind of leans into number 3. Don't do anything on a real book you haven't practiced. When I say real book, being like an actual book that you want to keep, that you want as part of your collection. You're going to run into and find a number of different defects as you go. And pressing and cleaning, it sounds, we usually have those two terms together. There's pressing and there's cleaning. It's not that simple. It's not just, this is how you press, this is how you clean. There's different pressing techniques for different sort of defects. There's different cleaning techniques for different sorts of defects. And you're going to find new things. You're going to go through, you get your practice books, and you're going to go do all this practice, and then you get a real book in hand, and you see something like, oh, I actually haven't seen this defect before. I didn't find a practice book with it, or I didn't know this was a thing. Don't get too cocky and be like, well, I've done practice on other sorts of things, I'll just wing it on this one. Don't do that. Find something else that has that and get some practice on it. Or if the technique can be practiced on on a book that doesn't have the actual defect, right? You can still practice on something. Practice the motions or the actions you would do on that defect on something else, even if that something else doesn't have that problem. Now, you won't get the did it actually work, but hopefully you at least get I can go through those motions without messing something up, without ruining something. So always be sure that that you've done something before on a practice book before you try it for real. Preferably a number of times. All right, because if you get it right the first time, you might have gotten lucky. Try it a few times. Next, keep in mind that everything that you do when working on a book has risk. It could be very low risk, it could be very high risk, but everything has risk. Everything from taking the book out of a bag has a risk, right? There's the obvious of the tape. Make sure you take tape off before you take a book out of a bag. And the way that you just handle the book to take it out, especially with older books that could be a little more fragile. Everyone loves Mylars for their raw books. I love Mylars. I keep my raw key comics in Mylars. They look great, they present well, and that's awesome. Mylars are the worst when you're working on a book, because when you're working on a book, plan to take it in and out of the bag multiple times. My general process is, if I have a bunch of books that need cleaned and pressed, I won't do just like focus one at a time. I'll set a chunk of time aside for doing a bunch of cleaning. So I'll have like a stack of books that, or I'm gonna set this like 2-3 hours aside for this amount of books that I'm going to clean, and I'm going to clean all of them, and then they go into the okay, these have been cleaned, they're okay to press now stack. What that means is that I'm going to be taking a book out of and into a bag potentially multiple times. Mylars are real tough for that, especially those tight Mylars, right? They look great, but in combination with how how thick they are, and they have less give, the material has less give. They also their feel kind of holds on to paper a little bit more than sort of your smooth normal bag. So they create some resistance when you're taking them out and putting them in. So be wary of that. And every little thing has potential risk to it. The way you lay a book down, the way as you're working on it, as you're like moving the book around on your workspace, has risks to it. Be overly cautious with every little movement that you do, because again, a lot of times it's slight risk, but there's always risk there. So be careful. We're dealing with paper, right? Paper is not designed to last a really, really long time. It's easily bent, creased, torn, all these things. Any little movement that can put strain on paper is a risk. So you have to be very careful. And a lot of the things that you'll be doing when you do cleaning and pressing is going to put a lot of strain on it. So you have to be very deliberate with your actions. You can never be too safe with anything you're doing when working on a book. And that brings us to the next piece of advice is that patience is key. You have to be patient. Be patient in your learning. Be patient in your practice. Be patient when you're working on something. This is something that different people have different varying levels of problems with. I historically, I have anxiety, and sometimes that can manifest in the thing that I'm doing is I start to feel rushed. If you ever start to feel that way, recognize it. And whether you have anxiety or patience issues or not, when you're cleaning a book, because you have to be so careful and it is a time-consuming thing, you can start to feel, anything that takes an amount of time, you can start to feel a bit anxious. So one thing that I always do, and I suggest to others that do this, is if you're starting to feel, and we all know our own bodies, and we know when we're feeling that way, as soon as you start to feel maybe that little elevated bit of heart rate, stop. Just stop what you're doing. Stop. Slow down. Step back. Breathe. And think. Think about, what you're working on and the risks that are involved. And it's easy when you've done something a lot, right? I've been doing this for a long time. You kind of get stuck in the motions, right? I was like, I'm just doing the same thing I've done 1,000 times before. Whenever I feel like that, whenever I feel that heightened sort of blood pressure going up, or my heart rate going up, not blood pressure, but my heart rate going up, I've trained myself to stop. I just stop. I step back. I take a deep breath, and I think about look, no, I can't get into that mindset. I have to slow down. I have to be patient. If you are not a patient person, then this might not be something for you, or you can't control that patience. This might not be something for you, and it's okay. And that's why there are people out there that do pressing for others exist, because it is not for everyone for a number of reasons, and that is one of them. The next thing I would say is, when you go out and do your research, you're going to find a lot of things that say, do this, right? When you see this, if this is the type of book or this is the type of defect, this is what you do. What there's not a lot of out there, and what you have to be wary of, and a lot of this is what you will just kind of learn by doing practice and doing things, is it's not just about what you do, but it's about what you don't do. There are things that you can do for some books that you don't want to do for others. For example, one thing that is a very common technique with older books is to have a humidity chamber. Where a humidity chamber is, you get some sort of chamber, usually like a plastic tote or a tin, and you put some water in it, and you put the book in there, not directly in the water, obviously, but I mean, there's plenty of ways to make humidity chambers. Go look them up. And what that does is it sort of loosens the paper a little bit. The humidity kind of loosens the paper. And for some particularly stubborn pressable defects, it will make it a little easier to get them out. You can't do that with everything, right? You have to be careful. And there's different level of humidities you do with different books. Modern books, for example, do not take well to moisture at all. And a lot of this has to do, and going back to why you want to do this practice, is you go to a website or you read a book and it says, all right, if you have a Bronze Age book, you need to press it with this much heat and for this much time, and this is kind of like the standard. Understand that's a baseline. That can differ from area to area, depending upon the area of the world in which you live. Getting back to the humidity, I'm kind of fortunate in that I live in an area that has fairly high humidity, and that's good because there is a little bit of moisture. In very dry places, low humidity places, that's what can cause books to become brittle. And if you add extra heat to that, like what you do with pressing, it can be real bad. So the amount of humidity you need to apply to a book and the amount of heat you can apply to a book can differ based upon where you live. Some cleaning, like cover cleaning techniques, you can do on Silver Age books, but you don't want to do on modern books, because of either like the gloss of the cover or just the material of the cover, the stock of the cover. So you kind of learn that stuff through practice, and you're going to get a lot of information on this is how you do this, but not a lot of this is what you don't do for these specific cases. Next, I'd say is look out for variations. Anything that is sort of out of the norm for a book may require you to alter your technique or have a different technique. For example, I have an idea of sort of like the standard modern Marvel book. And I know what I do for all of those that fall into that realm, right? I know that the staples are a problem. I know that the staples stick out, so I have to account for that with an extra piece of protection for those staples. I know that there is that digital code that I have to take into account with extra protection. 99% of those modern Marvel books have those sorts of things. Every once in a while, there's a Marvel book where they'll have some additional inserts. And does that change what you need to do? Maybe. Maybe not. I see sometimes there's Marvel inserts where I'll use this as an example, where let's say there's like an insert in here, and it's kind of like one of those gatefold things, right? And the edge of the insert doesn't go all the way out to the edge of the page, right? The edge of the insert kind of goes right there. Well, if you completely ignore that and press the book like you would most Marvel Modern books, you're going to end up pressing that insert into the pages that it is facing. So, I mean, that's just one example. But you'll have an idea of a norm of this is your typical silver, bronze, modern, dark, prestige, normal, like thick bound book. And for the most part, you can handle them similarly. But every once in a while, there's a variation. And don't treat those variations like they're any other book of that same sort of caliber. Again, stop, think about it, go do research if you need to. Just don't just charge ahead and do it like you would do any other book that is in that era or of that style. Now, if you do this for a while, you may get like friends that ask you to do things for them, right? Like, oh, I know that you press books. You've been doing it for a while. I have some books. Would you do that for me? It certainly happened to me. Don't do anything with someone else's book that you wouldn't do with your own. And I mean, it seems kind of obvious, right? Because the risk is there. Have an understanding with that person. Be like, okay, I'll do this for you, but understand that there is inherent risk in doing anything. Work out ahead of time. If something were to go wrong, what's the deal? How would we resolve that? Just you and something, hopefully something doesn't go wrong. Things probably won't go wrong if you've gotten to that place where you're comfortable enough to work on other people's books, but it's always a chance. So make sure that's worked out ahead of time. Don't try new things on someone else's book. If they're or something you're just not comfortable doing, be more restrictive. And maybe there are things you would do on your book that it's a little bit riskier technique, so you wouldn't do it on someone else's book. So I guess the other side of that is don't automatically do something on someone else's book you would do on yours, if it is something that carries a little more risk with it. For example, there are there's cleaning techniques you'd call dry cleaning versus wet cleaning. I would do wet cleaning on my books. I would not do wet cleaning on someone else's books just because there's more risk involved with it, and I don't want to accept that risk. So I don't do it. Or if I did, it would have a different conversation with that person, being like, look, you really, really, really want me to do this, I will do it, but I normally wouldn't, so you accept the risk if something happens. So just, if you're working on someone else's stuff, just be mindful of it. It is someone else's, so make sure that all the possible things are worked out with that person. Along with that, don't go outside of your comfort zone. If there is something that a defect that you have, and you do research on it, and it seems like something that you're just not comfortable with doing, don't do it. Don't do it. Even if you've done a bunch of practice with it, at least do practice with it. After that, if you're still not comfortable with it, even if that practice goes well, if you're still feeling iffy about it, just don't do it. It's fine. There are there's a lot of things that you can do that can do more harm than good, and if you're not feeling great about it, just, it's okay. Leave the defect, or find someone who will do it and is comfortable with it. Just don't go out of that comfort zone. And I imagine there's a lot of people like that, where, like, yeah, I'm comfortable with taking modern books off the shelf and pressing them and whatnot, but they wouldn't be comfortable with doing, let's say, if they had like a $1,000-$2,000 book of their own. They just don't want to risk it. If you don't feel comfortable with it, yeah, don't do it. If you're comfortable doing like a very specific range of books, maybe just modern within a certain value range, and you're okay with doing that, but everything else you send off to a presser, that's fine. That's fine. You don't want to go outside of that comfort zone. Next is start low. Start low, and this applies to a lot of things. Obviously, it applies to value and risk, right? So start with your practice book. Start with your quarter bin, your dollar bin, $10 books. If that's what you need to pay for certain types of books or certain types of defects to practice on, start low. It also applies to technique. So I mentioned that there's a lot of like standards out there. Like for this type of book, the baseline, the standard is this much heat for this much time. And you're not really going to know what that is the first time. So take that baseline and start below it and work your way up to it until it finds a place where, yes, this is comfortable, this is working. Stop there. I still do this when I get books in that seem different than anything else. Right? I'll get books that are like independent publishers, right? And the someone let out a big snore. The printing quality on some of these independent publishers is not great. At the very least, I'll say it is not normal, right? It's not what you normally see with your Marvel, DC, Image, most of anything else you see out there off the shelf. So if you get a new modern book, but it's an independent publisher, and the type of paper, the type of ink, the type of cover seems a little bit different than anything you've done before, don't just do it like every other modern book that you do. Those numbers might not apply. Reset. Go back down low, right? So if the baseline for a modern book is 145 degrees and you have a different book, a book that is a different texture, paper, ink, or whatever than you've seen before, start it at like 125, 130 and see how that goes. Like, oh, yep, this like the book isn't damaged, but it's still not adequately pressed. Bump it up like 5 degrees and then do it and move up from there. You can always go up, right? You can always go up. You can't come back down. Like once you've gone too high, you can't undo that. So that goes with the three things of the three factors of pressing a book: time, pressure, heat. You can vary all of those. Right? Start low. Work your way up to find the minimum that works. Don't overshoot. Because if you go too high, too long, too much pressure, damage can be done that is irreversible. Start low. Next, have realistic expectations. Have realistic expectations of yourself. Have realistic expectations of your work. Have realistic expectations of the book. So, again, this kind of goes back to know your limits. If this sort of thing is not for you, understand that. If a certain technique or thing you want to do, you're not comfortable with, be realistic about that. Be realistic about the amount of work and time and money you're willing to put into it. Be realistic about what you're able to do. There are some things that you may see a defect. You're like, oh yeah, I can work on that. I can probably get that out. You might not be able to. Not everything is workable. There will sometimes be things that I thought I could clean it off. Turns out I can't for whatever reason. It's okay. You can't turn everything into gold. And that leads into be realistic about have your expectations be realistic about the book itself. Sometimes you'll be presented with a book that just like there's nothing you can do, right? There's not everything is cleanable, not everything is pressable. You have to be realistic about that. Not all books are good candidates to be worked on. I've had people send me stuff to get cleaned and pressed, and I told them, it's like, I wouldn't do it. It's just like it's not worth it. It might not be worth it for value reasons. Like, yeah, I could clean this, I could press it, it will look better, it will present better, and if that is your goal, by all means, I will do it. If you're looking for a grade bump, it will look better, it will present better, but because it has like this tear in it, it's not gonna increase the grade, right? You'll see same things like there's a color breaking crease, a huge color breaking crease that limits. It can't get above a 4.0. It's impossible for this to get above a 4.0 with a color breaking crease that big. Nothing I do to that book will give it above a 4.0 because it has that issue with it. Some things may not be good candidates for other reasons. Spine rolls, for example. Sometimes you see books with really nasty spine rolls, and you can fix those. You can readjust spines. However, spine readjustment puts a lot of stress on the spine and the book itself. And if that book looks like it's just kind of hanging on by a thread as it is, it's not a good candidate. Whenever someone comes to me with like it has this bad spine roll, can you do something about it? If they send me pictures or whatever, I'll say like maybe. I would have to see the book in hand in order to determine whether or not I would actually do that. Just because of the stress that is put on the book by readjusting a spine. It may not be worth it. Like if the staples are loose or the paper is it's real thin because it's just got worn over time. Like, no, not going to do it. So be realistic about all those things. Yourself, the work that's possible, and what can be done with a book given its current state. Know your limits. This is kind of something that I've mentioned a few times through this. Know what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with. The amount of time you're able to or willing to put into it. Know those limits ahead of time, and if you can't meet them, that's fine. But just don't push those limits. When limits get pushed, that's when bad things happen. Right? If you're being pushed, like, oh, I don't feel comfortable with this, but but I know it can be done, so I'm just going to try it. That's when bad things can happen. So know those limits and stick with them. And the last thing is have fun. If you're not having fun doing this, then that's when you start to get complacent. You would start to maybe cut corners, and again, that's when bad stuff happens. If you're not enjoying it, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. And I understand that if you have your collection, you want it to be improved. If you don't get some, and there's a amount of enjoyment of seeing this is what it was, this is what it turned into. But there also needs to be some enjoyment in the act itself. If you're and it's about the journey, not just the destination. The destination is very, very important, and there's a lot of satisfaction to be gained from the destination. But this is an art form. I strongly feel that this is an art form. And if you don't get satisfaction and get enjoyment out of the art itself, then it might not be for you. If it's just a means to an end of improving the book financially, its financial status or its grade or whatever, then you might be better off sending it off to have someone else do it if you're not enjoying it. Because again, if it takes a lot of time, right? And I'm not just talking about the practice, but it takes a lot of time to clean a book. And if you have to spend an hour cleaning a book and you're not having fun during that hour, then that's when you're going to start again becoming complacent or want to rush things, just get it over with. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to be in that place. Because that's when accidents can potentially happen. And I'm not just talking about this, but with anything in general, but it certainly applies to cleaning and pressing your comics. So that's it. That's sort of my beginner advice. So for those that are just starting or thinking about starting, I hope that people would see this before they start, because I think there's some good advice in here to determine whether or not you should even go down that road. Because just to start up, there is a monetary investment of press and material and time and all this other stuff. That if you can determine that it's not for you before you invest all that, then that's good. And there's nothing wrong with that. Not everything is for everybody. So learn that as soon as possible. But if you do that research, if you get through this list and you're still like, yes, this sounds great, I want to do this, that's awesome. I hope that you do. I hope you follow through. I hope you have great successes. I hope you get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I hope you get that pride of seeing taking a book that didn't look great and turning it into something awesome. I wish everyone that goes down this endeavor to feel that. I really do. But that's it. That's my beginner advice. So let me know what you think. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all that stuff. And of course, don't forget to make yours Titan. This video was brought to you by Titan Comic Pressing. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Titan Comic Pressing LLC.